this is what's called balance of power in 1914. Balance of power, looking at these basically 6 nations, okay? And of course, Turkey is labeled Turkey, but it's actually considered part of what they call the old Ottoman Empire, all right? But it's the same place, all right? And you'll notice that this version is going to be slightly different than it's divided, basically divided down the middle. Okay, so let's just put it that way. Everything to the right of this sheet over here, let me just open it up really quick. Everything on the right-hand side here is the Central Powers, right there. Everything on the Allied side is on the left-hand side of this line right up the middle. All right, so that's really simply how it is. So in the first question, it asks, which countries shown on the chart were members of the Central Powers? And right there, your answer's right there. It's very simple. All right, so I'm not going to worry about these questions because quite honestly, it doesn't do this page justice. So let's look at it for what it really represents, okay? And what it represents is a really great example of looking into the future. Because quite honestly, if you look at all of these numbers, they tell us a story, don't they? If we're looking at sides, and there's a war of attrition, okay? And we look at the left side in population. We'll just categorize this first section here just in population. And we look at Great Britain, it says 46 million, France 39, almost 40 million, Russia 167 million. If this side or alliance would go to war with, say, the Central Powers, Germany at 65 million, Austria-Hungary at 50 million, and Turkey at 21 million, which side has the advantage? Okay, it's pretty obvious, right? Just with one area. If you add Russia into the equation, it basically equals a majority. That over the top majority. So if this was a war of attrition, the Allies would win. Clearly win, not even a question. Let's look at the army size. Now, these numbers represent the ability for that country to put soldiers in the field. So what does it mean to put soldiers in the field? That means they have to have equipment. You can't just put a soldier into the field. You have to train them. You have to have the facilities to train and equip them. The Germans had the ability to mobilize 8 million men within a few weeks. By the time the war begins, Germany was able to mobilize and move 8 million people into service. So of the 65 million soldiers, they have the ability to move 8 million. Now that means that they have guns for those guys. They have support equipment. They have trucks. They have artillery. They have everything they need in the potential for war. Let's look at the other side. Look at Russia and its mobilization ability. Russia, even though it has 167 million, it only has the ability to put 4 million men into service and into arms within a couple of weeks. Okay. Great Britain has the smallest of the forces. Now, a lot of people will look at this from face value and go, whoa, wow, Great Britain really isn't ready for war. On the contrary, Great Britain actually holds the largest amounts of colonies and or of imperialist control. So Great Britain, quite honestly, has more superior trained and ready soldiers. These guys are ready to fight like right now. They can literally be put on a boat and sent into battle. That's a huge advantage. Where the Germans are mobilizing for several weeks, the British can actually put into practice over 700,000 men, and those men all have, and many have battle experience, previous battle experience. Let's look at the navies. By far, look, Great Britain totally dominates the world when it comes to naval forces. 64 battleships, 121 cruisers. Cruisers are like small battleships. 64 submarines, double of what the Germans and even all the Austria-Hungary and Turkey doesn't even have a navy. Okay, per se. So if you look at Great Britain and what it's able to do naval from a naval power standpoint, they're very advanced. You understand the British Navy also. You can't look at it as from the number standpoint. You can't necessarily judge it from face value. Once again, the British Navy is old. It's been around for a long time. Many of those battleships, I would say, 3/4 of their battleship fleet is aging. It's powerful, but it's not modern. The British are in the process of modernizing their Navy, and what they do is they have to do it in piecemeal because, of course, it costs a lot of money to take a 55 to 35,000 ton ship and modernize it. In some cases, redo the whole hull, take it into dry dock. It costs millions and millions of pounds. So when you look at British, you're looking at pounds sterling, right? The same thing goes to maintenance. Maintaining a battleship. What is the nature of steel when you put it in salt water? It rusts, doesn't it? It rusts quite quickly. So you have to maintain that ship. You can't just let it sit there and port and rust. You have to have a continual practice of scraping and painting over rust. And of course, that's what a lot of the sailors do on a regular basis. People will basically spend a lot of their time cleaning the decks, swabbing the decks. So you got that, cleaning the teak or oiling the teak wood that the decks of a lot of these armored old battleships are made from. So there's a lot of work to be done to maintain guns, gunnery systems, training, all those things. So to have a big Navy isn't necessarily a luxury. It's a huge responsibility, okay? So even though Great Britain looks that it might be militarily weak, it is not, okay? And of course, it has a large enough population where, if need be, it can train those soldiers as well. But just of the 700,000, those guys are ready to fight like tomorrow, okay? France, another story. France is probably better equipped with a larger military force because its neighbor is Russia, or excuse me, its neighbor is Germany. So in the case of France, France has gone to war with Germany before. The French have a military policy when it comes to the Germans. So there's, in these alliances, there's different levels of readiness. Okay, all right. Let's look at the last set of numbers down here. And look at the numbers for Germany. 17 million metric tons of steel it produces every single year. 17 million. If you want to compare German production to Russia, France, and Great Britain, it probably equals that of all three nations put together. So Germany on its own can match steel production of the entire alliance that the British and French and Russians have together. So if you want to look at countries ready to go to war in 1914, Germany is definitely ready to go to war. They have a modern military. They have a naval power that is increasing. And these 40 battleships, most of them are brand new in construction. So the Germans, of course, decided in the early 1900s to build a navy, and they put a lot of money into it. They spent a lot of gold, a lot of Reichsmarks to build that navy. And of course, it is designed to basically counter the British Navy. It is a very modern navy. Probably the number that is pretty interesting right now is the 23 submarines that the Germans have. That number would increase by 30 times by the end of the war. The Germans would see the only naval policy that really works for them is submarine naval warfare policy, which really affects the ability for the Allies to equip themselves. Okay, all right. So that's a really interesting. I'm going to throw this other thing up for you guys. Okay, and this thing here, and then I'm going to put it on the screen for you. Get this up here, and just kind of throw a little bit of a wrench in the example here. There it is right there. Okay, so here's the same sheet, and let's throw the United States on it, just to basically give us some perspective. Okay, get that done like that, and then we're gonna do this. Here, I'm going to freeze that image on there because I need to use this really quick. Look at steel production for the United States, okay? So if we look at American steel production, Okay? You're going to see a number of 27 million metric tons of steel per year. 27 million. You're also going to see the number. Let me just take this really quick here. I think. I need to take a picture of this really quick. Hold on for just a sec, okay? And I got to post it. For my own good here. All right, so the next number is, in comparison, the United States produces over 10 million more metric tons of steel than the Germans. And if the United States were to choose a side in this war, they are going to make a huge impact on it. Look at the population of the United States as well. Almost 100 million people. Now, militarily, army-wise, the United States is tiny. I think we have at the beginning of World War I about 200,000 men in service, about 200,000. That's actually been the American military's kind of standard for number. I think we don't have more than 200,000 men and women in uniform at this point in time right now. It's very expensive to equip a modern army. And that number, of course, is going to play a huge and significant role in the future of this war, especially when the United States decides that it's in its national interest to join the war. So that's a really important number. Can somebody please Google the population of Russia today? What is the population of Russia currently?
147.5 million as of 2018.
100 and what?
144.5 million as of 2018.
How did Russia in 100 years lose population? It's the same. It's about the same geographic area. Now I could argue the point that maybe the Baltic states were included, but that number is still small, isn't it? If I add a couple of smaller countries. You're gonna still get a number that's roughly the same or slightly less today than the number of people in Russia today. That's a very significant number, isn't it? That tells you that the future of Russia, is it a bright one? No, I don't see it as bright. They're not having babies, and their population is not increasing. Guys, one sign of a country's success is its ability for its citizens to feel comfortable enough to have more children. Guys, if you can't afford children, people don't like to have them. As much as there's a stereotype in that people have lots of kids, they just have them for any. No, they don't. In times that are tough, people do not choose to have kids, and they try not to, because it's expensive, especially if you are worried about your future. People traditionally have fewer kids. Okay, all right. How many people live in the United States today? Let's make a comparison of the growth of the United States and Russia in 100 years. So check that number out for me, if you would. I'm actually going to bring in this shot here really quick for my own.
128.2 million as of 2019.
So what? How does that compare to the Russian population today?
It's like over 200 million.
Right. Difference. One country grows, and another country does not. And you can look at it a lot of different ways.
Teachers, please pardon this interruption. At this time, we need to excuse all members of our girls' varsity volleyball team. All varsity volleyball team members are excused at this time. Thank you.
Okay, so with these numbers, you can definitely tell a story. You can tell a story of one place in the world that declines as a world power. A lot of things happen to Russia at this time. One is politically it changes from a monarchy to a socialist, and or at this time they will be inventing the idea of communism system. Okay. And you'd think that with this change in policy, because people, of course, are sick of the being hungry, and you would think that this would change Russia and make it grow. And one of the things we find out is, yeah, it does temporarily, but there's another impacting thing that really determines Russia's future, and that's two wars. Their involvement for 3 years in World War I, and then almost 90 million people disappearing from the earth in World War II. So Russia literally loses well over 100 million people in the last 100 years. And then that doesn't include the purges that were made by Stalin during the during communist control of the Soviet Union, okay, all the way into 1958. So there's a lot of change happening in Europe. And another lesson that we learn from this is that if you don't have war going on where your people live, do they prosper or do they basically struggle? We know they prosper, don't they? Okay? That if you can keep war from happening on your soil, you're not going to have an issue, or you're going to have more of an advantage when it comes to growing your state, your country, your system. Okay? And if you look at American policy after World War II, finally, after World War I and World War II, what does America do? It extends itself militarily throughout the world. And it chooses to fight wars abroad and not at home. Probably, so we're going to look at that dynamic. And this is the political change that happens with the United States. It takes time. Remember, a third of Americans were basically immigrants from Germany. And of course, they're going to have to choose sides. They're going to have to determine what side of the spectrum they're going to be on. What side they're going to choose when it comes to their future. Okay, so when we look at this this dynamic, the United States is going to come in on the sides of either the Allies or the Axis, and the answer is going to be mostly political. It's going to be, where is the best chance of America's right self-determination? Who historically is going to give us, and do we owe friendship to, and what is in the best interest of the American people? Deciding with a power that is looked upon as being aggressive and a bully, or being on the side of powers that are defending their interests from that bully. And of course, America usually takes the road that looks a little bit more and looks at a little bit more positive for its future. Okay, so I just wanted to throw that idea out there. All right, so I'm gonna finish with that. So that's this idea, this balance of power idea. You can really look at this deeply, and you can learn a lot of important things about where the country needs to go, or where it finally does go when it comes to Europe. Okay, and of course, how we stand when it comes to population, production. And this validates America's success, doesn't it? Guys, those years under Andrew Carnegie and John D. Rockefeller growing the country industrially worked. And it worked not just a little bit, it worked a whole lot. Our country grew in population, it grew in production, and it's going to grow in world power as well. Okay, all right. So that's the end of that. That's the end of that.